I come across this resource that has 4 metals all in one with high grades, no waste, an opportunity to do this in a way where you really think this through before you go and unleash your destructive chaos.
Hey, humans! Welcome to Demystifying Science, the only show that puts the entire Earth in a zoo.
Today, we met up with Erika Ilves, a business developer and strategist whose main concern is creating resource extraction paradigms that secure a safe, sustainable future for all of humanity.
She was co-founder of Offworld, an industrial robotics company where her team of machine learning engineers developed teachable mining robots.
She was also co-founder of a company called Shackleton Energy, where she developed technologies to extract water ice from the moon in order to fuel deep space missions.
Right now, she's working on a project called Deep Green. They're focused on retrieving 100% waste-free raw materials from the depths of the ocean, and then implementing tracking and transparency measures necessary to keep those materials in use perpetually.
Erika imagines that through extreme recycling motifs, industries like Deep Green could secure enough resources from a tiny fraction of the ocean floor to effectively end rare earth mineral mining. Forever.
Forever. Extraction with a clear expiration date. It's good thinking, humans.
Yeah. Our conversation investigated the details of this paradigm, but it also dug into the questions of human division. Why are collaborations on the micro and macro scales so difficult?
And then we even considered how Earthling cosmology's tendency to frame existence in this twin drama of birth and death conspires to make long-term thinking and planning almost inconceivable.
Obviously, we Avaflossians see the universe as a little bit older than you humans do.
Well, eternity is a long time.
Yeah. So let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and keep the conversations brewing with a like and a subscribe. It helps us so much.
Enjoy the conversation, humans.
See you next week! Hello.
Hey.
Hello, hello.
So, our goal is to figure out a little bit about the humans before we get to Earth. And so to do that, we've been talking to scientists, engineers, philosophers to kind of get a sense of what's going on with humans and the state of the planet and what humans are going to have to do for the next, 100 years in order to make sure that they actually survive. And we heard that you're working on something like this. Can you tell us about that?
Just a quick question. And your intent is pure observation, or what's the agenda?
Well, we're not really supposed to be interfering with things, but we kind of like you guys, so we want to help if we can.
The comms aren't so good as we get closer and closer to Earth, so there's definitely less monitoring of our activities. So we might be able to get away with a little bit, if there's some place that we can press on. Secretly, quietly. Do you have ideas for what we could do?
To help out?
Yeah, exactly.
Invade us?
Uh-oh.
There's only 2 of us right now, so probably not going to happen.
Threat.
Exactly.
I've actually always been irritated by this whole notion that the only thing that would get our species organized is an external, credible threat. It's a pretty pessimistic view.
That's interesting. Somebody we were talking to yesterday brought that up.
We were talking to a Norwegian researcher. He studies evolutionary psychology. And he was telling us a joke that, you have 2 people from the village that hate everyone from the city. And they get together with 2 people from the city, and then they hate everybody from the state capital. And then 2 people from the state capital get together, and they hate everybody from the larger state government, and then onwards and onwards and onwards until you realize that any two group of peoples are going to find somebody else to hate on Earth.
There's an alien version of the same in the Middle East, where I used to live in GCC for a while, and there's a picture of an alien and a UFO, descending, and there are two, locals speaking, and the alien greets them with "Here I am, I come from the other planet," and the question the first human poses is, "Are you Shia or Sunni?" It's kind of immediate. Let me figure out whose side you'll be on. Yeah.
So are you not optimistic about humans right now?
I am extremely optimistic about humans right now, mostly because I don't think there is another alternative.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a ethically justifiable position to be pessimistic. It doesn't lead to anything. So I can be... I'm sure I'm sharing many of the same emotions that many of the people living during, the same time on this planet have. But I don't think we can afford any other position other than optimism, and then just trying to roll up your sleeves and do what you can.
So what are you doing right now?
What I'm doing right now is trying to figure out how the biggest frame I can put around it is redesigning the material basis of human civilization, which sounds very big.
You should be done with that in like a few weeks, right?
Yeah, that's Tuesday afternoon.
Oh, very good.
So that tell no one. Yes, but I think one of the material history of our civilization is quite fascinating. It is the materials we use for making our, all the artifacts we need in cities, and all of that has evolved quite dramatically over time. And we are in the period of our history where we are trying to get off one form of energy and transition to a different way to power our civilization. So we're changing 250 years of infrastructure, and it's, I think most people, human minds are scope and scale insensitive. So, when you start talking billions and millions, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Well, it's hard to imagine, but we do have to replace, billions of cars. We need to replace all of our power generation. We need to build energy storage if we use, renewable power and all of that. So it's a monumental task that has a significant material component. We're going to be needing a hell of a lot of new minerals and metals in order to build it. And so we're all very focused on getting off fossil fuels, but it's a little bit like playing a game of whack-a-mole. We are trying to whack down fossil fuels because of all of the impacts it has. But in order to do that, we need a hell of a lot more metal that comes with its own, environmental and social issues. What I'm focused on is trying to figure out how to meet at least some of this demand for new metal, for all the new infrastructure, with the least possible amount of damage to the planet and the people, and then make sure that from now onwards we are not using these metal atoms from circulation. That we, if we dig them up from wherever we dig them up, we don't end up, dumping them into landfills, but recover and recirculate.
And you call this a closed loop system, correct? Something like that?
Well, it's closed loop in a sense that it's, I actually love Professor Braungardt's construct here, or kind of a frame around it, which is, he's the author of From Cradle to Cradle. And, he frames things like metals as technonutrients that are circulating through our technosphere, not necessarily in a circular loop, because you can recover the materials and use them for something else in our technosphere, but it is definitely trying to keep the technonutrients within the system as opposed to lose them and have to inject new ones. So that's kind of largely his idea.
So how much more stuff would humans have to dig out of the ground in order to be able to make this transition away from fossil fuels?
Unfortunately, quite a bit more.
Does the Earth actually have enough stuff on it?
The Earth has enough stuff on it and in it for a long while. I think it's less, at least at this point in our time, it's less about availability. It's more about the economics and all the negative, or what until now we've been thinking of as negative externalities. I think we've learned in the last 50 years that there is no such thing as externality. They're all internalities to our biosphere. So it's really the environmental and social costs that is a bottleneck. I mean, economics as well, but with economics, when you really need something and the price goes up, you will find a way to dig it out.
Do you share any of the optimism with the space industrialists who imagine shifting these externalities of industrialization to outer space?
Well, I've spent 5 years of my life on one of those schemes.
Scheme doesn't sound good.
Well, okay, let's find a better word. Big ideas or plans. I mean, I definitely, I did not shift. I'll tell you what it was, but I didn't shift because I didn't believe it is not going to happen. It's just about the timelines and priorities. I do think eventually it will, it will make sense to produce, at least for all in-space use. It makes no freaking sense, to lift materials off of this planet, and it's cheaper. It creates less, again, environmental externalities to source a lot of the materials, whether it's fuel or structural materials for whatever we want to do off-world, from space. So that definitely makes sense. But it takes a long time. I mean, if you think about it, today we have 100 odd launches per year, rocket launches. So it's not. I mean, that's like a tiny little straw in terms of our ability to expand. So it's going to take a long while, just transportation infrastructure, before you can access space at low cost. But the big idea that I was working on for a number of years is space-based solar power, and trying to build power generation capability instead of covering our lands and water with solar panels, for example. You could have you can collect solar power in geostationary orbit and then beam it down, and you have the advantage of being able to beam wherever necessary. Lots of problems with that as well, but that's one way of taking quite a lot of land use and a lot of externalities out of the biosphere of this planet, and moving it into space.
I've heard you talk about the necessity to turn to science fiction to build ideas. And in your worldview, have you found anything in science fiction that people haven't yet tried to apply? Have you found hope in these ideas that people have kind of come up with that haven't been turned into ideas that people have tried yet?
So much so, actually, that I, at some point in time, and quite a few years back now, I decided that I should disabuse myself of the notion that I can come up with anything visionary or new. I think our science fiction archives are absolutely filled with the most incredible ideas. We've imagined a lot. So I think we are, the supply of imagination is quite impressive. I mean, we just need to look back and read some of the things
Who has the time, though? There's so many things going on
this planet now. And I actually think people have the time. I think we've created this notion that, people's attention it's all about attention economy and where our attention has shrunk and all of this. But at least I have seen myself gravitate towards long form everything and switch off all short form, because we're trying to microdose things that are just often don't lend themselves to that. So I now watch 3-hour podcasts. I no longer do tweets and Facebook. I mean, actually, I've just gone off a couple of years ago and just don't do that anymore.
Good for
Feels
you.
a hell of a lot better.
Oh, you have a particularly long view of things in general, though. You've been working on these space projects, and now you're working on mining projects for Earth in order to help this transition. Do you think that that's something special about the way that you view the world, or just that you've managed to position yourself to be in a place where you can work on that? Like, are most people thinking like this?
How long term are people capable of thinking?
In general, yeah.
Well, I've only ventured out into the cold because in a few years ago, when my business partner and I were trying to figure out what to do with had an existential crisis, wanted to figure out what to do with the rest of our lives and where, and I guess unlike some people in the younger generation, or the people who came after us, who were less animated but by what am I passionate about, and it was more, the driving thought was what needs doing, So we ended up trying to construct a picture for ourselves, like what are the existential risks faced by our species, what are the major growth opportunities, and then map out, what areas have a lot of coverage and what areas don't have a lot of coverage. And it wasn't particularly surprising, but anything longer term didn't have a lot of takers, and everything short term and more optimization focused had quite a lot of attention and resources allocated. So we decided that, we would need to focus on things where there's not a lot of coverage. So, there's nothing special about us other than, just trying to fill in the gaps that we saw. That's all.
What were the existential risks that you identified for humans?
We had quite a few. I think it was 16.
Oh, wow.
They were, roughly half of them were existential risks and half of them were what we framed as developmental opportunities. But on the existential risk side, it's... we may have framed them slightly different, but we're living through some of them right now. Pandemics was definitely on our list. All the both man-made and natural, so anything from supernovas and asteroidal and comet impacts to supervolcanoes and earthquakes and I guess the more interesting bits are man-made runaway tech. We're still living on a planet with a hell of a lot more nuclear warheads than is required to destroy this planet. So we just kind of gotten used to it, and it's no longer as much of a hot topic. And kids might not have drills trying to survive a nuclear holocaust, but it's not like we don't have enough weapons at the moment to destroy the entire biosphere. So
they have drills trying to survive school shootings now.
Oh, wow.
That's gruesome.
Weird.
That's pretty.
Hey, we never really dealt with that on Elvafloss. They're not a really violent place, Elvafloss. Why do you think humans are so violent? Why do you, and so angry. There's so much anger and violence that humans are willing to turn against each other. Is it their animal nature that comes out? Is it a lack of ability to communicate? Because we see all these people talking about big ideas, technological progress, and something that underlies all of these discussions is that humans have absolutely no ability to problem solve peacefully with one another. Not no ability, right? There's some. But things go kind of haywire a lot.
And we're the best we've ever been. So, that's one of the perspectives that I, whenever in despair, look to history. That's kind of one of my, well, I guess it's already Marcus Aurelius' trick, right? Whenever you are in a emotionally challenging things, try zooming out. But I normally zoom out, not just in space, but also in time, right? I find the whole construct of big history, that starts more or less, with everything we know, right? Like Big Bang in this case, and all the theories are and kind of to this moment, right? If you view that in this moment, in that perspective, then, well, first of all, we're total nascent baby species. That's one, right? Like we only showed up, in the last second of this evolution on this planet. Secondly, if you then zoom in on our own history, I think we've done all right. I mean, we're definitely work in progress and lots to do ahead, but we've gotten better on many accounts. We don't, in most parts of the world, stoning is generally frowned upon. Wasn't even in some parts of the world, even a few decades back, it was, an acceptable way to punish people. So, I mean, I do feel like we've made moral progress. It's just woefully slow compared to technological progress. So, but we're getting better. So I like the trend. It's just the specifics of any given moment that can lead one to despair. But overall, I think we're headed in the right direction.
Do you think the fact that humans see themselves as broken off from one another contributes to their inability to think long term? Like, I noticed you guys have this, you just mentioned it, but on your planet you have this idea of the Big Bang. And we don't have that on Alba Floss.
Where does everything come from? What's your scientific theory?
Well, it's always been here.
There's no beginning. There's just this moment.
No, there's no beginning. So, and there's no end. So maybe that changes the way that we view the future. I wonder.
So how do you view the future? Is there such a thing?
Well, sure. But we have a lot more responsibility to the future this way.
Because it won't end one day. With humans, sometimes we run into people that have this attitude of, why bother working on these things? Why spend the effort if everything's going to end anyways? Because even if humans survive the death of their sun, even if they manage to figure out how to keep their galaxy from crashing into another galaxy, they're still faced with the fact that the universe will one day die and extinguish them. And
that is so funny that you'd have such a response from other humans. That's literally the darkest night of my soul that I've ever had in my life was when I was reading a compilation. Nick Bostrom and some other authors had this global catastrophic risks, and they've gone meticulously and systematically gone through every single thing that could befall us, right? And offered, ways that we could deal with it. And then they arrive at entropy, and quoted the Bible, with ashes to ashes, if we should only be this successful, if we make it to this point where we go out when, entropy takes over the entire universe. And I just thought, what a defeatist attitude.
Yeah.
This is why entropy ended up making it as one of the existential challenges onto our list as the ultimate thing to overcome. No, One of my favorite authors is actually a physicist, David Deutsch. I don't know if you've had a chance to interview him, but he's definitely an amazing thinker, well beyond physics. And he wrote a book called many books, but one of his is The Beginning of Infinity. Where he kind of makes a case for a universal constructor and history without an end, and I think makes a pretty compelling case that we have a shot at something like that. It's not guaranteed. It's kind of, depends a bit on us and a bit on our cosmic context. But as long as we have a shot, I think that gives, at least that's how I make meaning of everything I do. If it contributes a tiny bit towards that direction, then it's not a life wasted.
It seems to us like a lot of human explanations come down to making stories for things, which is natural. And since humans have a beginning and an end individually, it makes sense that they would want to project that upon everything. So
yeah, I still am struggling with this concept that an end gives meaning to the interim.
agreed.
To me, it does, in my mind, it does the exact opposite. The end robs the interim, of meaning for me, given how I construct meaning. So I kind of need the promise, or at least the hope of an unending journey, to know that, somehow then this makes a difference.
Should come hang out on Alpha Floss.
Yeah, probably.
It's a much more optimistic place.
There you go. What's your means of propulsion?
Ooh, can't tell you too much about that, but let's just say we found a way to disconnect from gravity.
You can't tell them that.
All right.
Don't tell anybody.
Yeah, don't tell anyone. We're going to get in a lot of trouble. We're told not to interfere very much, so Mickey's always wanting to spill the worms.
So you have a prime directive, and you're just planking it.
Well, did you happen to see those videos that were posted in the New York Times about the little tic-tac shaped UFOs?
No.
No. You should check those out. Or don't. But those are our drones, and we're on our way to refuel them. So we've been remotely monitoring Earth for a few thousand years now.
And you're right that things have gotten a lot better. That humans have shifted the ways that their civilizations work. But the last 250 years have built a really complex, very dependent society on electricity, on these large-scale industries. And your challenge that you've laid out of transitioning Earth to a different material structure, of shifting the very foundations of civilization, is enormous.
And there's this thing about you guys leaving the solar system too. So we found one of your little probes bursting out of the solar system, and our boss wasn't too happy about that.
We have to make sure that you stop fighting with each other before you leave the solar system.
We can't have you wandering around the galaxy with your bad attitude, basically.
Only optimism allowed.
So is there like a filter? You'll only allow species who are a good contribution to the cosmic culture?
Oh, yeah.
Something like that. The problem is that chaos breeds more chaos. So if there's a lot of misunderstanding being spread around, you probably noticed this. You guys have this little plague of, you have fake news and information overload, and we just can't have that polluting our information ecosystem.
One bad graffle spoils the whole bunch.
Okay, and what's your benchmark for when do you know we're ready?
When you stop fighting.
When you can evaluate information without necessarily having to depend on external information.
Experts?
Experts, yeah. So ideally, in a society where you start to have creatures that are venturing away from the center, each creature that wanders away is going to have a robust mechanism for making sense of the world, because you have to trust each individual to make good choices when they're disconnected from the whole. When everybody's in one place, you can kind of press on it. But, if somebody's on Enceladus and having to make decisions that are going to affect things down the line pretty intensely, you have to make sure that they're going to be making good decisions. Otherwise, how can you send them out there?
And how do you, because we have accumulated quite a bit of knowledge on this planet, where, even a human lifetime thrown at trying to internalize the fundamentals of the totality of knowledge that we have created is insufficient. So how do you internalize and make everybody, at least sovereign enough and or at ease enough with the fundamentals of reality and what we know about it and what we don't know about it, so that they can be trusted with being able to make sense of things? How do you solve knowledge compression problem?
A lot of it has to do with being able to identify patterns and evaluate, I don't want to say bias.
Contradictions?
Evaluate contradictions. Evaluate how this can fit into a larger pattern. Is that us?
Is that our alarm?
Do we have to go? No, this is the
Is that
worms?
the reactor?
Oh my god. Is it the reactor?
I should check.
No, I think it's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. Okay. So, you're right about this knowledge compression problem, where humans have a huge amount of information that they have to be able to process. And something that we've observed in human learning systems is that despite massively powerful computers and programs, learning is still focused on facts rather than patterns. And humans are really, really good at patterns, but not so good at facts.
The education system is nuts. We teach fragments, and we teach outcomes of pursuits in each fragment of reality. So we never connect that into one whole. I mean, many people graduate high school and don't understand how astronomy fits with chemistry, fits with physics, fits with biology, and kind of they can't weave that into one narrative arc of how all these things interacted, evolved, and so on. So that's kind of one bit that we do. And then we don't really spend a lot of time on process. How do you generate more of that knowledge? How do you, so it's,
Seems like a lot of people graduate with their PhD without being able to connect those things.
Yes, that is, we definitely need to address that one.
Sorry about
Are you
that.
Disoriented by
There's an alarm going off.
I worry
about these alarms.
Yeah, things can go south really quickly if we don't pay attention to these things. So,
yes.
Before I don't want to get too bogged down in the many issues with the human systems, because obviously there's going to be a lot of issues, and obviously
You're going to come up with your unique solutions too.
Of course, and it seems like if there's enough people working on these questions that you're not that far off, especially in how far your technology has advanced in a short amount of time. The programs that will help people create patterns and be able to see the big picture and get around these knowledge compression programs they don't seem like they're that far away.
A lot of them are just language technologies, ways of communicating robustly, ways of solving conflict, ways of explaining phenomena without contradicting yourself, without reifying verbs into objects, things like that.
Yeah, it's a little, it might be a little trickier with humans. We still operate within a lot of competing belief systems that some of us imprint on our kids, and then kids spend a lot of time trying to either follow or grow out or question. Or so we're still an interesting mix of competing, conflicting belief systems. So we're still figuring that one out.
Do you meet a lot of resistance to the project that you're currently working on from people because of that?
Absolutely. It's actually the first, as long as I was focused on space resources, the only form of resistance on environmental or social grounds that I've ever experienced was, as part of the plan, we were, kind of extracting water ice from the lunar poles. It was kind of part of the whole big idea of enabling in-space transport. And I have learned to many native tribes in North America, the moon's surface is sacred and plays a big, part in some of the myths and stories. And so the notion of human action on the surface of the moon, even if it's not visible, just conceptually knowing that there's human presence was not palatable. So it's my first exposure. This was nothing compared to.
What was your response to that?
Well, nothing happened. I mean, we ended up not getting to the lunar surface.
Sure.
Out of Shackleton, so that became, ultimately irrelevant. But it's.
But say you had to relate to that person, do you think it could be done? Could you find a shared value?
Well, it ultimately depends on where that particular, belief sits and how deep it is and what it's really about, right? Because if it's completely fundamental to someone's existence, and a celestial body that you see most of the nights, and your forefathers have, and so on and so on, it's actually it's not a minor fixture in human existence. So that's kind of a big one.
But it might be rooted in some sort of existential concern. And if you were able to perhaps explain to that person that you were also interested in solving an existential concern.
Or get them a seat at the table, right? So oftentimes people will be resistant to something that they feel like they have no power over. Is there an impulse to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table for these sorts of things? Because people talk about space mining like, the first trillionaires are going to come from space. I can imagine that someone from a Native American tribe that's been disenfranchised for, 300, 400 years, probably 300, is not going to be very interested in cooperating with something like that, just because they're not going to see any benefit from it. What's it going to do for them?
Maybe they need stock options.
Yeah, no, I definitely. I mean, it's even trickier with the current project I am involved in.
Because you're working on the oceans, right?
Yeah, and oceans are, in many people's awareness. Again, we've got a couple of hundred of years of industrial history. Where extractive industries have played quite a destructive. I mean, we've gotten a lot of benefit out of it, and we've managed to evolve quite a bit as on the back of it. But we've also created quite a lot of damage to our biosphere. So we are definitely in a self-hating phase at the moment. I'd probably say where the mere suggestion that anything industrial or extractive would move into what many perceive as the still untouched frontier is just violently not okay, and you can, you can sit there with your analysis and showing how much more, how much you'd be able to reduce the impacts if you tap a resource that has many of the metals we need all in one place, how you can generate no waste, how the ecosystem that you're impacting have much less life associated with them compared to the, terrestrial habitats that would be destroyed. The logic, I've learned in the last couple of years that the rationale and evidence and facts and all of them is actually kind of less important there, because that's not what people know. We're currently in a stage where we have a violent emotional response to more, anti-response to, or allergic response to more destruction. And
Can you work with that? Can you work with emotions?
That's one of those things that is required for being able to leave the solar system, by the way. You guys got to get your emotions under control.
So we need all to become Vulcans / Spocks. Kind of that's the direction.
Quinn likes that show.
I do like that show. I think that's a little extreme, that's a little cold. I think that it is more that humans need to be able to disengage from their emotions when they're not helpful. Not to be cold across the board.
But in the meantime, are there ways you can imagine leveraging those emotions for productive?
Are you saying manipulate people?
Well, for their own good. Just trying to help here.
Yeah, no, I grew up in a place that systematically manipulated people for their own good, so I'm not as psyched about that.
What place was that?
Well, I grew up in Estonia, but at the time it was Soviet Union, so I've had some exposure to what a propaganda machine can do.
They make good videos, right?
Yeah, that's...
With a strong aesthetic, at the very least.
And female and male equality.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, gender is definitely not something that was super strongly embedded. But to come back to you, how do you deal with that? There's definitely some sort of truth and reconciliation type process that's required on issues where we're so we all of us get so emotional, right? Because at the end of the day, what's at stake is a lot more destruction, and it's we're not very good at trade-offs, especially when they're difficult, because obviously in the ideal world we would have some form of inexhaustible source of matter that we could just tap and make everything we need, but that's not the case, and we do need to go through a massive industrial transformation, and these materials will come from somewhere. So yeah, no, I think it's I don't actually, I am still trying to absorb and understand how we can build bridges. I used to believe that if only everybody could sit down at the table and look at the same sets of facts, but we would be able to arrive to similar conclusions. And I think what I've learned, and perhaps too late in my life now, in the last couple of years, is that actually, before looking together at anything, there needs to be trust. And I think on this planet we have, the trust in institutions, trust in companies, is, or governments. It's at all times low. So it really is now, I don't know, person to person trust. I to be honest, I really don't know.
That's a fascinating thing. But the basis of progress is trust, and humans are struggling with trust. So you have an idea, which is that if you were to undertake this, it's seafloor mining, right?
Yeah, the particular resource that we're focused on is, actually, I'm going to show you.
All right.
It's rocks like this. This one is a big one, but we have fields of these. They're not attached to anything. They're just sitting on the seafloor. And we have giant fields of these, and they contain the four metals that would really come in handy for electrifying our global passenger fleet. And there's plenty of it.
What are they?
They are called polymetallic nodules. It's quite a fascinating thing. You don't find anything like that on land. They precipitate around a sand grain or a seashell. Over millions of years, you have a manganese iron lattice that forms, and then it absorbs metal ions from seawater or from pore water from the sediment. And so they just grow, in very deep waters. You have, it's like 4-6 kilometers depth, and you need certain pressure conditions and certain, there's lots of conditions that need to be met for them to grow. But we've got plenty of those on the seafloor.
And you want to go scoop them up?
Well, first of all, we need to understand all of the. Oh, and another thing to understand about these, they don't have any toxic levels of deleterious elements, which makes it possible then to use 100% of the material. So, they.
So you could literally melt that entire thing down and have just the waste from actually melting it.
Even all of you get metal, and then you get converter slag that is not toxic, so it can be used as building material. So you literally can use 100% of this mass, which is quite unusual because a lot of the ores that we have on land contain antimony and mercury, and then they need to be taken out, and then toxic sludges be stored indefinitely into the future and all that.
How did you get your hands on something that is you're holding something that should be 4 kilometers down at the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah, we have in fact, we have, I think, maybe, close to 100 tons of these, just collecting bulk samples for, processing pilots and so on. But
you must have a lot of divers.
Actually, I've recently been looking it up. I think the diving record for humans is 300 something meters. So this is 4 kilometers. You could do submarines, but that would be, pretty expensive adventure. Now we have these big boxes that we drop off of the side of the vessel, and it takes 1.5 hours for this to reach the bottom.
Wow.
And then it goes to the bottom, and at the bottom, it opens before it hits the floor, and then it just scoops up what's underneath. So that's how we get our nodules today. But this is all for exploration, sampling, science work. But it's like exploring space, except for there are aliens in that environment as well.
Yeah. Do you ever accidentally scoop up some crazy looking ocean meat?
So this is the short answer is yes. There's not a lot of it. However, what's in there, you need to imagine it's a lot of pressure of under 4 kilometers of water. It's dark. There's no food sources other than what falls from the overlaying, what dies and falls and doesn't get metabolized in the above layers of the water column, so that's kind of the only food source that they get down there. As a result of this, most creatures are very small, like 4 centimeters is the largest thing we found. However, because when we lift the box cores, a lot of the organisms, they're gelatinous, and when you get them up, they're not preserved because of the pressure change. They obviously don't arrive in the most beautiful state.
They pop.
They pop, unfortunately, yeah. But it's a fascinating world down there. So and we're trying to figure out, understand it enough so that we can cause as little damage as we possibly could.
So that seems like the first step to ensuring trust, right? Because you're going into these really, really, really fragile ecosystems that, there's been research that shows that ecosystems that regularly are confronted with natural disaster, big storms, earthquakes, these are the really stable ecosystems. Part of the reason that ecosystems in the tropics are experiencing such destruction with human interference is because of the fact that they don't necessarily have a history of terrible, terrible events happening to them. They haven't had this sort of extinction robustness that has occurred in places where there's been glaciation on the earth, where there's regular hurricanes. And so you have natural selection acting as part of basically climate events and terrestrial events. Tropics don't have that. So they're very fragile. You can imagine that the continental shelf of the ocean would be a similar sort of robust place because you have runoff from volcanoes, you have all kinds of things that are happening on land that are going to affect the continental shelf. But when you start to get 4 kilometers down, that's basically a place that we know almost nothing about. And it seems like convincing people that scooping up huge chunks of that space is going to take actually studying that space a lot.
Yeah, can you like partner with scientists or something?
I mean, it's slow, right?
Well, we know a little bit about this. There's been more than 200 campaigns to the area. We've collected quite a few samples. Like, it's the current library is tens of thousands of samples. But I mean, there's also things that we are still learning. So yes, indeed, we have, our philosophers. We've partnered with the best scientists we could find. The deep sea science community is not extremely large when it comes to deep sea biology specifically, but we've partnered with who we see as the best minds, and coming back to the trust, I think the only, we're not attached to making sure that it's this resource. We're attached to the least harmful solution to the planet. So we're completely, everybody will be able to publish. It's all the research and everything that comes out would be open, so we can all decide when the time comes and we have collected enough information and think that we understand our impact. So I know it's potentially a somewhat naive approach, but we've decided to take that, and if that's not going to be enough to build trust and be able to make a grown-up decision together, then I don't know another way. So we're going to try that one.
Are these rocks magnetic?
No, they're not. I wish, but they're not.
So are there ways of being so? Okay, I'm curious about the extent to which this is on the seafloor. So 4 kilometers down is pretty. Is it rare on the Earth's oceans, or are most oceans that deep? Like, how much of the Earth's ocean is 4 kilometers deep?
Well, it's it's called the abyssal plain, and abyssal plains is the single most common environment on our planet. So it's not that it's fortunately, it's not particularly unique. And you can find these rocks in actually quite a few areas in the ocean. However, the particular combination of metals that we need, which is, at the moment we need nickel and cobalt and manganese for batteries, and a lot of copper for all of our new electric infrastructure. The composition of these rocks in different parts of the ocean varies, and then this particular bit that we're in, which is called the Clarion-Clipperton zone, it just happens to have the metals we need for the green transition, even in ratios that we need for the battery chemistry. So that's quite uncanny. But just to give you a sense, if we as a civilization decided to use only these rocks to build our electric vehicle batteries than to electrify the entire global fleet. We would use 0.3% of the seafloor.
How many, what percentage of the rocks what area did you say this was called?
It's called polymetallic nodule.
And there was an area of the seafloor where you said these polymetallic nodules were found in the right conformation.
Yeah, it's the Clarion-Clipperton zone. It's kind of halfway between Hawaii and Mexico in international waters.
How conveniently close to California.
Well, our ship is, the operation is out of San Diego, so.
So you use 0.3% of these of the seafloor, right?
But what percentage of the Clarion-Clipperton zone would you need to consume in order to make this transition?
Well, you would need to know how big Clarion-Clipperton zone is. It's around 4.5 million square kilometers, and this would be.
Would you have to suck it dry, so to speak?
Sorry?
Would you have to suck it dry, so to speak?
Suck it dry.
That's inflammatory language. Would you have to collect all of the polymetallic nodules in that area in order to make...
Oh, I see what you mean. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, 1/3 of the area has already been set aside in preservation zones. So those are not going to be touched. Then in our exploration areas, we will be setting aside around roughly 15% of the area into reference zones. And then, we are not picking up 100% of the nodules. We're leaving also roughly 15% behind to enable habitat connectivity. So, the restoration, just to help with restoration of the area.
So my question was, is this a one-time payment? If you use 0.03%, are you going to keep these metals in circulation after that?
That's the plan.
Cool.
That's the idea. No, we internally we've pegged, the end of mining or collection of these nodules to 2046.
Wow.
If all goes according to plan, we shall stop in 2046. But yeah, the idea is definitely, I do believe we can. I don't think we'll be able to eliminate mining on this planet this century, but I think we can relegate it to a marginal activity for sure this century. So that's part of the redesigning the material basis, right? Kind of just try to keep all the nutrients in the technosphere as opposed to, keep feeding it from land or the ocean.
And that's the closed loop system, right? Where you collect these things, put them into circulation, and then don't let them leave.
Correct. The challenge that we have on this planet is we haven't developed very evenly. So, 1 to 2 billion people on this planet enjoy one standard of living, and then the rest are at various points on that journey. So it's much easier for well-built out, well-developed part of the planet or part of our civilization or world to get there faster. We have some countries that recycle, 90 to 99% of all nutrients, at least when it comes to metal that come in. Japan is a good example. European Union is moving towards that goal. But then there are parts of the world that don't even have the infrastructure that they could then, recycle. So they're still building it out. So there's not a lot of places where they could go and take it out from other than, virgin resources.
And is that driven by policy, or are there economic incentives to this sort of recycling?
It varies by part of, which part of the world it is. I mean, as a company, we've decided, that it's really stupid to treat metals as consumables, given that they are retrievable. So, we are kind of, our whole idea is try to change the business model underlying it as well. I mean, this is the bit that we can do without waiting for policy action. so instead of selling the metal, we would be renting it out. And then at the end of life of a product that contains the metal, we would like to get it back and recover it. And, you could go, if we grow up even a little more as a civilization, we could have shared common stock of nutrients that we could just keep tapping. So that would be like, the next phase in the evolution in terms of, rather than private, ownership, you just kind of have a,
like a share world,
like a shared economy for metals, with extremely strict accounting, in whose possession every atom happens to be, and then responsibility with that owner at any given time to make sure that, like today we have kind of, we're still living in a funny world where we buy products and we own them, right? And then nobody asks us, what have you done with that product at the end of life, right? And you could have thrown it out, you could have given it into recycling, but there's no responsibility associated or liability associated with that. I think, policy-wise, I think we probably need to get closer to a place where, once you get an item, you're now a temporary custodian of all the materials in it.
Well, you see that on Earth with some goods, right? I think that I saw, what is it, milk bottles and cans? You give people money when they bring them back, don't you?
I grew up, needing to give back newspapers and glass milk bottles. That was a pretty good incentive because you got money indeed for returning them.
It seems like an easy way to incentivize humans across the board. Just give them something back for doing the job, right?
Absolutely. We've made baby steps in that direction, but changing that mindset, on a whole scale, kind of civilizational scale, is probably still going to take a little bit of time.
Well, the other side of it is transparency. So being aware of where those resources are, who's got what. And
absolutely. That's why tracking it, right, throughout the system. So at any point in time, so we always kind of imagine, like kind of the distributed ledger tech or whatever we're going to have, by the time we get into production, so that you at any point in time, you'll be able to look up, that set of, that set of atoms from that place that caused all, that amount of environmental damage. Who owns this now, and where, kind of where are they in the world?
Do you have thoughts on that distributed ledger tech at all? Are you a proponent of these ideas?
Yeah, we've even done a white paper, actually about a year ago, on kind of the new tracking all the way, metals all the way to consumer and through, from beginning through the supply chain. But then there's so many of, people who are kind of trying to develop the platform itself. So we thought we're going to wait a little bit to see, rather than investing and developing that to ourselves, we'll see if we'll just use a third-party solution as they mature.
And we're talking about some kind of blockchain or something, right?
Yeah. Our white paper was based on a blockchain, but as I said, it's probably we're not the natural owners of the platform itself. So we'll see. But if nobody rises to the occasion in the way that we would like, then, then we might invest into that ourselves.
We're going to meet with a blockchain developer next week. So I'll be curious to talk about these issues.
Is this the answer to building trust, like you said?
Algorithmic trust. Yes, in supply chains. Not sure if it, I think the trust with regard to the extent of destruction that happens with, extractive industries. One of the big concerns is out of sight, out of mind, right? Not a lot of people can drop by to 4-kilometer depth in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So I think the solution there is more, as we need a, kind of sensor array anyways to be able to manage the operation. So one of the things, we are kind of considering, which is quite unusual, I guess, in the extractive industry. I hate actually thinking of myself as coming from, being associated with the extractive industry, but is open access. just anybody could see at any given point in time what's going on there. So I guess that would be the ultimate. You can drop in anytime you want. You can see what's happening. You can see what's the scale of the impacts. So that's another part of the path that we're exploring.
Is there a possibility of less responsible competition dropping in? Like, could a guy row his boat out there and just start scooping up super ore?
Yeah, a guy with a rowboat that's equipped with the machinery capable of dropping a box 4 kilometers down into the ocean type of thing.
Like convert his lobster ship or something.
Well, that would be a pretty significant boat, I would say. So that you have a sense, on average, there's about 15 kilograms per square meter.
Wow.
So you'd need to be out there for a while. Plus, all the ship tracking now. It's quite. If they figure out how to do this so that nobody can see and scoop up a lot of this in a responsible way, then I'd probably be calling them up to see how they figured it out, because it's not a minor undertaking to operate at 4 kilometer depth.
So can we talk a little bit more about the details of the operation? So you said that you're in international waters.
Yep.
Who decides what happens in international waters? Who do you have to ask to go do this? Do you have to ask someone?
Yes, we do have to go and ask someone. And it's an experiment in international resource governance that I personally find fascinating. Maybe we will get closer to where you might guys be at. But back in the 1960s, when we were trying to figure out what to do with space resources and ocean resources, one of the big ideas that we had is that things that are outside national boundaries should be deemed common heritage of humankind, and developed and used in the interests of humanity, both present generations as well as future generations. So for the specific international seabed, they put in place a regulatory body, UN did, which they called International Seabed Authority. So it has 167 members and European Union, and it's been around for 25 years, and it's been very slow, but it operates by consensus. So you can imagine what it's like to align 167 member states. It's been taking a while, but it's managed to put in place exploration regulations. It's managed to get to 4th draft of the very unfortunate framing, but they call it exploitation regulations. So they're still finalizing that. And I can't think of any other extractive industry on this planet that has had so much time and attention put into regulating it before it even starts,
That's a good sign.
Very slow, but it's moving.
And so you basically have to go to what did you call it? It was the
International Seabed Authority.
So you have to go to the International Seabed Authority and give them a business plan of what you want to do, and then they bring it before the council and then they vote on it? Or how does that work?
Yeah, pretty much like this. They first give you an exploration contract. An exploration contract is basically an obligation to do a lot of work on the area that you're in. That includes a lot of environmental baseline studies.
And who pays for that?
Sorry?
Who's paying for that? You guys are paying for that, or the authority is paying for that?
No, we're paying for that.
Okay.
So it is. I think I've spent some time in the mining sector on land. I'm pretty sure that if the standards to which we are doing environmental baseline studies in the water column, if the same standard was applied on land, we wouldn't have a single mine permitted. It's quite in depth. I mean, we are spending a lot of time on microbes and, all mapping ecosystem throughout, the 4 kilometers. So it's exciting. Our chief ocean scientist kind of jokes that, for the first many years of our existence, we're really not in the business of business, but we're in the business of science, because that's where most of the money and time and effort is spent, just baselining this environment to make sure we know what we're doing. And when we don't know what we're doing, at least we have, we operate on small enough scales that we don't cause, too much damage before we can adapt. So it's an interesting process.
Do you share this data with other scientists?
Absolutely. As I mentioned to you before, we actually just announced a partnership when, all the institutions that are involved have been named, and they will all be publishing the data.
How do you go down? Do you have like a submarine that you send down there with people in it?
Our chief ocean scientist actually has been in the area a couple of times in the submarine. We ourselves don't own one, but would love to have one. We've actually explored a couple of companies that are making submarines. None of them were already had subs that could or at least submersibles that could that are rated to that depth. But some of them are working on it. So we there might be 1 or 2 available in a year or 2.
Do you spend a lot of time on the boat?
It's quite an undertaking. So in order just to get to our exploration area, it's 4 to 5 days of sailing.
Wow.
And then 4 to 5 days back. And then every campaign is, anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks.
Is there a bar?
No, the ship is dry. But it does, we've partnered with one of the largest shipping company on this planet, Maersk. So they're actually really incredible. And if people want to learn about space exploration, being stuck in the middle of the ocean with a very diverse set of people, many of whom are scientists and contractors who are not who come for a specific campaign with a specific goal. So there's not a permanent group of people who always go, right? There's the composition of who is on board changes. It's actually quite an art form to keep everyone happy, getting along nicely, and it's kind of a microcosm for. So we're Maersk people are so good at this. I've grown to appreciate how not trivial it is to be on a limited space, in a limited space, confined, and with no, the wisdom of no escape. How to make everybody play when you can't
say that again.
Do you think that you can scale their strategies to be planetary?
Just lock everyone up.
No escape.
No escape. You have to deal with it. Yeah, maybe. Sometimes when we have the option of switching off the screen or saying something on Twitter and then, not facing the person you're saying there's something to, it's so much easier to not be the best you could be and not rise to the occasion. So, yeah, no, I definitely.
Randomized housing for a weekend.
Ouch.
That would be a disaster.
Frightening prospect.
So I wanted to ask you one last thing here that goes back to some of your previous work. And you talked a lot about nurturing the growth of supermen and superwomen, these visionary people that
can change the course of human futures, right?
Yeah, and they seem kind of few and far in between. Have you given any more thought to that in recent years as to how to nurture the development of these individuals, or do you still place the same priority on it? Why aren't there more female supermen?
I think there are plenty. They're just not potentially seeking to be seen as much necessarily. And, I think maybe the one change that I think at the time when I was talking about, the bridge between, well, the whole Nietzschean idea of Übermensch, I think I was very much locked into, planetary, very long view, right? It has to be big to make a difference. And I think we definitely have too few people thinking like that. But I think I wouldn't underestimate the importance of maybe not, cosmic scale endeavors, but maybe smaller scale, but maybe less visible, but just as important, because they make a difference. And a few of these, can add up to quite a bit. So it doesn't need to be the biggest, the longest, the grandest, it's, as long as it's helping us to move in the right direction, that's good enough.
What was it that tempered your view on this? Was there a particular event? Was it your experience with the space industry?
And the disappointment there of just waiting for it for so long and it being still so far off?
Was it just wisdom of years?
Keep going, keep generating. Once upon a time, I thought that the very niche that I could fill is my what I then perceived as indifference to being able to see visible progress during my lifetime. I just I thought like, okay, there are not enough people out there who don't give a shit if, they can see with their own eyes what they have, the impact of what they've been working on.
Like you imagined you were above needing positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I guess you could reduce that to this. Yes, well, fine.
Well, it's very honorable. I like that. I mean, I think that many of us, I certainly hope that I am. Sometimes I don't think I am, though.
I need encouragement personally.
In a positive reinforcement, I guess it depends on where the source is, right? Like I mean, I still don't really. Well, I'm human, so obviously I give a shit, but I don't give as much shit as I used to. Like if I benchmark myself against my younger self, I definitely give less shit about what other people think. However, it's a little bit unsettling if you keep working on something and make no freaking progress whatsoever in your own eyes,
Yeah, absolutely.
I've tried to talk myself into, okay, so as long as, okay, I fail, but as long as somebody after me can learn from this is something, right? Like I could hang on to that. But then I saw that not a lot of learning was happening from all the mistakes that we've made with our space venture. Then I thought, okay, maybe I'll just have a tiny little bit of a break and do something where, it will not take 100 years, but maybe a few decades, and maybe I can see something, at least a tiny bit of a corner of that. So that's how I ended up, shifting tracks and going from space resources into Earth resources and trying to figure that bit out. But yeah, no, it's actually, it does take, maybe I don't have, strong enough a character to just go, I'll keep pushing. It doesn't matter if I see, that it moves a tiny bit. I need to see it move a tiny bit.
I think that makes sense just because there's so many problems facing humans today that to work on something that won't pan out for another, I don't know, few hundred years seems crazy.
But I wonder if it couldn't be broken down into smaller steps that were sort of loggable.
But I think
that's the story I'm telling myself now. You see, if before I was all about, so my logic was as follows. Space resources, was the thing for me to do because, we're faced with a lot of existential risks. Quite a few of them could be mitigated somewhat if we diversified our presence. How do we diversify our, astrophysical presence? Well, we need to get there, right? Quite a few very bright minds are working on getting there. but not enough right now working on, once we get there, how do we survive, right? So that's how I ended up in space resources, and I thought that would be the angle in space resource. I mean, but that's very difficult to fund. So from there we went, okay, so because there is no difficult to fund that kind of work, why don't we develop analogs of something that will ultimately work on the moon and Mars, but in the meantime solve terrestrial problems of the mining sector? That's how I ended up, our space robots, we were started developing them for land-based mining sector. But then while I was there, I could see, oh my God, to fully automate underground mining, and the autonomy is not there. A lot of the basic physics we were struggling with, and I mean, lots and lots of problems, all of which had 5 to 10 year time horizon just to get to a place where you have something that works, and then I come across this resource, this one, that to begin with has 4 metals all in one with high grades, no waste, it just seemed like an opportunity to still be on resource extraction, still on this planet, but extreme environment, still out there. So a lot of operational logic for space exploration is kind of valid, and try to learn how to do this in a way where you really think this through before you go and just unleash your destructive chaos. So that's the story I'm telling myself now. How I ended.
You're definitely a superwoman as far as we could tell.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely not. So terribly flawed.
I think that the superwomen are flawed. Supermen are flawed too. Just their ideas are big enough that they cover up their flaws. And they're not willing to accept them quite as easily.
Do supermen even have friends?
No, I think they're very alone. I imagine they sit in their lairs, twiddling their money.
Well,
I actually don't think any of them twiddle their money. I think they're obsessed by problems and can't let go of them, thank God. And that might not make them super good friends, but we as species benefit from that greatly. So I think it's important for us to have a few of those. But I think, actually the one thing I maybe would say about Superman is that I've always defined it, not always, and that's a lie. I've at least in my head, there's a segment that normally our culture on this planet thinks are Supermen, but I've always thought of it as, we have 3 enemies, right? That Superman should be taking on. The unknown, the unimaginable, and the impossible. I think a lot of our culture is focused on the impossible, people who kind of go, I'm going to change this part of going to electrify the entire fleet. We're going to change the future of energy, right? The entrepreneurial story, I think, is very well embedded in our culture as a Superman domain. However, the unknown and the unimaginable, and for me, the unknown is basically the domain of scientists, and the unimaginable is domain of artists, right? Kind of being able to imagine the worlds that are not here. So that's your science fiction and so on. Those 2 domains have quite a few women, both on the science side as well as on the on the art side. So I think so. Let me correct my answer on the women. I think there are plenty. There's just less maybe visible in the entrepreneurial, big, galactic significance ideas front.
It's interesting that you say about the unimaginable. I've kind of looked at some of the human science fiction and the human art that is created, and it seems like something that is across the board unimaginable is a world where humans don't have conflict. Is that just because you can't create art without drama? Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy that because people don't want to watch something without conflict, that it's not possible to really envision that world? What do you make of that?
This is so perceptive. I don't know whether you've gone through cultural archives of our civilization, but now I'm going to come out as like extreme Trekkie. But I have watched, with Gene Roddenberry, by the way, who is the creator of the Star Trek I guess, culture and ethos and philosophy, right? I definitely see him as one of the Supermen, because he was able to imagine a human civilization post conflict, post resource scarcity, post traditional economics, as in which we've kind of immersed today. And I've read many books and several documentaries on kind of what happened behind the scenes on staff, among staff, when who are writing these, and how hard it was to write for Star Trek, because it's so easy to exploit conflict and usual human problems, right? And here you had Gene Roddenberry literally forcing everybody to think beyond that, like what are going to be problems that are exciting to see when these usual things that we've been immersed in for hundreds of years are no longer a thing, right? And he even had uprisings on staff because it was just very, very hard. But that's why I love Star Trek. I mean, so much. They haven't always been able to avoid it, but most of the time, I think they've done a pretty good job of exploring, what kind of problems and cultural encounters, first contact encounters, I love that creation. So, but it's true. A lot of our art strives on conflict because that's what gives it dramatic tension. But there is other kind, I know.
We'll have to check it out.
The TV series, not the movies.
Okay. We'll look.
Well, Erika, we've taken a lot of your time.
No worries. That was fun. I've always wanted a first contact situation, so I didn't think it would happen like that, but here you are.
Sadly, you're not the first, but you're in the...
Well, it's personal first contact.
Oh, personal, definitely.
Yeah.
You're actually in the top 20 or so of first humans, I think.
Well, you are first contact for me, so that's how you're going down in my history, so there.
Well, we've never met a human like you either.
Oh.
We're all quite different.
So
wonderful.
We need to go and sit with these ideas. Maybe we can talk to you again in a while.
I'd like to hear how the project is going where can you kind of give an overview before we leave of where you imagine you'll be in a year?
In a year, we will have created, tons of sample products for the EV industry. So that will be exciting because we'll have gone through the process of processing 17 tons of material. We will have had a couple of more of environmental campaigns and hopefully some things to share on that as well. And we will have, one of the things that we're going through at the moment is trying to reimagine. So it's longer term, but I'm quite excited to be able to share that with the world of kind of reimagining heavy industry in the 21st century that has taken lessons from the past 200 years of industrial history. So we're trying to imagine our, from ocean to land-based, how the entire ecosystem would work and where we'd be able to introduce all of the, closed loop thinking. And so we're actually working with an architecture firm at the moment, just, thinking this through and visualizing it. It's a little bit, it's a little bit like creating that positive construct future to strive for. We're not going to be there straight out of the gate, but at least it's a stake in the ground that we can then build to. So I'm excited about that too.
So aspirational.
Realistic science fiction.
I love it.
I love it too.
Well, we'll check back in a year or so and see how you're doing.
Sounds great.
Excellent.
And thank you for today.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, guys.